Contrary to popular belief, Tolkien's writings might just be more cynical in their worldview than George R. R. Martin's. I know what you're thinking, but let me explain. Many compare the black and white battle of good and evil in The Lord of the Rings to the morally complex web of intrigue, violence, and various not safe for work behaviors in A Song of Ice and Fire, and they quickly conclude that Tolkien's work is hopeful and idealistic, while Martin's is cynical and nihilistic. However, I feel that's a very surface level analysis, and I'm here to take a deeper look at what really sets these stories apart. It took me a while to dive into A Song of Ice and Fire thanks to the popular narrative that it's obsessed with only the worst in humanity, which I now don't think is true at all. I will admit that it does at times wallow a bit excessively in depravity and hedonism, but I want to take a step back and look at the story as a whole rather than hyper-focusing on its worst tendencies. The world of Westeros is dark and brutal, yes, but I tend to find the goodness of humanity all the more inspiring when it rises from the darkness, which we see in Martin's writing. Since we haven't seen the ending of his work yet, we're still in the middle of the story's darkest hour, and can't say how bright the light will shine at the end of the tunnel, but several characters are on clear trajectories for heroic arcs, and while many heroes have already died along the way, their legacies live on to inspire their people long beyond their demises. Meanwhile, the once seemingly triumphant villains are one by one reaping what they've sown, seeing their ill-earned gains crumbling around them as honor and virtue prove more enduring than strength and guile in the long run. But that's not the most interesting point here. If you zoom out beyond the plots of the main series within each fictional world, you will begin to see some surprising narratives playing out. You see, Tolkien dwells in myth, while Martin writes history. Thus, the individual stories Tolkien tells are typically more hopeful than Martin's, but on the grander scale, the story of Middle-earth is that of a world in decay, with magic fading and nature succumbing to corruption and industrialization, the great men and women of old becoming fewer and further between with time, whereas Martin tells a story about mankind rising from the darkness, as good men and women doggedly rebel against corruption and tyranny to build a better world. Martin celebrates a history of slow but steady progress, while Tolkien laments the inevitable death of all that is good and beautiful in the world. While the setting of Martin's epic is certainly more brutal and unforgiving, I don't think we can say his story is ultimately any more hopeless than Tolkien's. I hope you can see that these stories' themes are far too complicated to say that one is entirely positive while the other is entirely negative. However, a far easier contrast to draw between them would be based on the spirituality of the authors. It's common knowledge that Tolkien was a devout Catholic while Martin is a staunch atheist, and it shows in their writings. Tolkien's world and themes are, as he himself said, fundamentally Christian, with ideas about faith, grace, and divine will baked into the story, whereas Martin is constantly deconstructing religion in his books and ultimately seems to have a very existentialist morality. These two stories represent two vastly different worldviews, and the merits of each are worth debating, but the difference between them is not as black and white as we like to make it out to be.